Thank you. Now we're recording. Sorry, Ed, we didn't get you on the recording.
No worries.
Jay, it does say recording was.
Really? Can you start it? Or let me,
Yes, I can.
it doesn't say that. Sorry, folks. As you know by now, if you've attended this, I'm still struggling with Master Zoom.
Okay, it's recording.
Okay, my wife says it's recording. Thanks to Jane for her technical assistance. She's better at this. She does this at her work quite a lot, so it's definitely better than I am. More people came in. Good to see you guys. Good to see those on Zoom. Appreciate you coming very much. Thank you to Ed and Kristen for opening their home once again to us. So this is Think Again, Faith Again, and tonight is more of an emphasis on Think Again and less religious angst, although we probably might touch on that too. It seems like that's always a hot topic.
We can't talk about that here.
Well, we can always talk about it. We tend to always talk about it. But it's also nice to kind of think about more secular things at times that also impact us in different ways. Let's see. So I thought it'd be fun because it is a Think Again. We're not going to do a musical number and prayer and all that kind of stuff. But it would be fun to go around. We haven't done this in quite some time. So if you just one sentence, do it quick, something that you're feeling passionate about right now, or just something that's top of mind for you. And we'll just do a quick sharing around the room. Maybe we'll start with Ed because he asked that question when I came in. So we'll start with you.
I am passionate about fall. I love it. It's one of my favorite times to hike. And I always try to get up to the top of Mount Olympus once or twice a year. And I'm looking at maybe the next few days to get up to the top of Mount Olympus. So I'm passionate.
I love that. Maybe you should invite me because I do the same. I like to do the same. So it'd be fun. It'd be fun. It's a beautiful mountain. Maybe this way and so speak loud and give me your name, please.
My name is Emily White and I am passionate about peace building.
Perfect. Came to the right place. We need you. Your ideas.
Oh, okay, don't laugh. I feel like I'm too tired to be passionate about anything right now. I'm gonna say I'm passionate about sleep and I want to have fun.
That's legit. That's legit.
I'm passionate. I'm Alan Jones. I'm passionate about my time in the woods, which happens our backyard now. I'm very into that.
I love it. Yeah. Nice.
I'm Lorene and currently passionate about peaches.
Jane Griffith. I'm passionate about our daughter being home for a little while. We don't get to see her too often because she lives in St. Croix, Virgin Islands.
Welcome.
Probably avoiding a big storm right now.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Rochelle Ostler. We live in Virginia most of the year, but this is our first summer being in Utah for the summer, and I'm just passionate about cool, dry summer mornings and beautiful, cool, dry summer evenings.
I bet you are, considering where you normally live.
I'm Barbara Ostler and I'm David's mother, and it's just good to be here tonight. I could be passionate about that, that he invited me, but I'm thinking about something else. So I love fall, but I'm still clinging on to summer, and my patio is so beautiful. And I go out and, you work hard to get those flowers blooming. And my impatiens have never been prettier this year. And I'm just passionate about still having that pretty backyard to enjoy.
I love that. Thank you.
It's beautiful.
And you're going to keep an eye on him, right? That's why you're here, right? Your son, yeah.
She's got a little cattle prod. Don't go too far off track.
My name's Aaron and I'm passionate about being able to be with others. When we with each other.
Well, you came to the right place, Hiram. I haven't seen you in a few years. It's good to have you here. Thank you for coming. And thanks for bringing your dad.
I'm Walter. I've been passionate
just for the last little bit about beaver haikus. I had 2 beavers slap their tails when I was going down the Snake River kayaking on Monday. So
Wow,
I've been trying out some haikus. Back and forth.
how fun. I do haikus. We should exchange. They're a lot of fun. Nice.
What is a beaver haiku?
Well, you know.
It's gonna read us one.
You want one?
Oh,
Let's see, busy beavers swim as kayakers pass on by, slap goes the beaver's tail.
So.
Nice haiku. I love it. Love it. Well, I was just talking about his kayaking and hearing beavers slap their tails and writing haikus about it. Sounds like something you might do, Hamish. Welcome.
For some reason, I thought he was talking about beaver IQs.
I heard it that way
That's
too.
what I heard first.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
That could be your next haiku about beavers.
Oh, well, I guess, while I dabble in a lot of little things here and there, I guess the one thing I've been doing consistently since January is indexing. So I've got, doing about 30 records a day and usually about within an hour's time or so.
Wow.
And I've amassed over 5,000.
This is genealogy you're talking about, right?
Yeah, just family search.
Yeah, wow.
Indexing. But,
Do you have a language that you're proficient in?
well, I do doing French,
That's right.
German, and Dutch.
Yeah.
But if you become a little familiar with the, civil record, civil registration language and all that, you can branch off into other languages. You don't need a huge vocabulary to do most of these records.
Nice, thank you.
Sure. Heather, we're supposed to say something we're passionate about?
Yes, or whatever's top of mind, just briefly, yeah.
Well, I just went back to work for the first time, full-time in 10 years.
Whoa.
So I'm putting a lot of passion into teaching math right now.
Oh,
It's really the only thing I have time
Bless
to be
you.
passionate about right now,
What age are you teaching?
middle school.
Well, thank you.
Well,
We need your teachers. I'm sure you're excellent. Wow, it's impressive.
Algebra.
Some, yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Wow. So your kids are old enough, you can do that now. Because you've been busy doing a lot of that.
I'm Taylor Webb. I'm passionate about always learning. I just avoided leaving school as long as possible. I finally convinced someone to give me a professorship in the next month or so. So
Where?
I'm just years.
That's where you wanted to be, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, congratulations.
Wow.
What field?
I'll be in the radiology department. I do mostly biomedical engineering.
Oh,
Medical physics.
That's cool, Taylor.
Well, it paid off,
Good.
hanging around that long at
That's right.
school.
I found a way to stay. My friends tease me that the ultimate golden handcuffs for me are a university library card.
Love it, I love it. Well, that's neat, congratulations.
I'm Dan Egan, and this summer I've been kind of passionate about Pony Express.
All
I'm
right.
studying.
You related to Howard Eden?
I am.
I was just talking about that.
I've read a book, I mean, I helped write a book on that, sorry, Walter, yeah,
Pretty interesting stuff.
he's a very interesting
We
guy.
actually drove out the old Pony Express Trail to Ivapaw.
Did you see some wild horses?
Saw some wild horses. yeah.
A lot of stuff.
A beaver?
No beaver.
Not much.
You could do a haiku about wild horses.
Did you see old old wagon train tracks? Yeah, there's some, you can see there's a lot of ruins and monuments that the Department of the Interior put up
But no,
years
it's
ago. It's a lot of nothing,
Yes.
like somehow they did it. Impressive.
That is, well, way to go. That's neat, we'll have to get together after, because I helped a gal who was related to him do a book on Howard Eden. So that's how I got familiar with that story. Okay, sorry.
I'm Maureen Egan, and I'm passionate about healing divides. That's why I'm here in person today to fill the spirit. And just figuring out how to get along when you don't agree. Doesn't seem like it should be this hard.
No, it doesn't.
So hard.
Well, let's see,
So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Ross Collier, my stock answer to Jay's question because I get irritated by it. I'm passionate about dispassion. I feel there's too much passion.
Well, true.
How we do things, how we think, feel, but most lately, I've just been reading some. ancient- Most recently on my pleasure reading this, some ancient histories on Assyria and Christendom and 17th century England and Central Europe.
That sounds fascinating.
There's a recent book that I've read and far enough into them that I can feel some confidence in recommending it.
Ross is quite the reader. He's often recommending good books for me. So who was it that was discovered Jonathan Haidt? Oh, Ed. Jonathan Haidt, right?
Oh, Jonathan,
Yeah. Ross is
Where
where
I do mine, I think that helps bridge the gap in my mind.
yeah, that's a helpful
yeah.
construction there. We'll go you three, and then we'll go to Hey Mitch, and then we'll go to Zoom. So we're just introducing ourselves. Hey, we're just happy. Well, you have a quite a drive, so we're just.
Well, it was only 3 minutes away. Where we ate.
Oh, I was gonna say, I know you live further away. So introduce yourselves, speak loudly, and something that's top of mind for you right now, just briefly.
Top of mind?
I was gonna say passionate, but Ross likes dispassion.
Put it down for all the.
I'm Jeff Davis, live in Alpine, Utah. And we love coming here. I don't know, I mean, Wasatch started today, the Wasatch 100 started today, so that's probably true. For the top.
Yeah, that we're not in it.
Yeah, I need to convince my wife to let me run it.
Just let me do it once. I just did it once.
She's done it twice. We're not doing it anymore.
I did it once, and I did the bear twice.
I hear you.
Yeah, she doesn't like to be supported.
This is my friend Heather.
Hi, Heather.
Hi.
You have to say your name.
Passionate
Heather.
about it.
Oh, I'm not passionate.
So what are you thinking about? That's top of your mind.
My kids.
Good, good. There's a lot that we can think about with that.
Yeah.
Most of us haven't been.
Oh, you have to, oh.
Well, yeah, I mean, you haven't, no, you're your own person.
I want to know what's on your mind. It's not Wasatch 100.
I don't know. I'm just, same with her, concerned about my kids and their safety and security in this world.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right, hey Mitch. Wait, now you were in San Francisco recently or what? Right? Hanging out with the homeless.
Yeah.
If I remember right from your
Yeah, it's
post.
my name's Hamish. I'm passionate about contemplative meditation, and the way that's manifesting lately is trying to build something like a Mormon monastery. So
Sign me up.
yeah.
I know when I worked at BYU, with a fellow who, I think he later became a priest, but he was married at the time, but he said, he talked about that, about going up to Huntsville, I guess, and just hanging out at the monastery there when he needed a break from things.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, I kind of wish we had something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seems like Bill Turnbull's thinking something.
Yeah.
So,
He's
So,
feeding me stuff.
why don't you, so I'm having Hamish come in December to do our December gathering. And he's gonna kind of lead us in a very thoughtful, meditative night. But you do this every Thursday, pretty much.
Yeah.
And do you want to just talk briefly about that?
Yeah, everyone's invited, yourselves and anyone that you think might benefit or be interested. But every Thursday night downtown, we just do a little meditation gathering. Usually lasts about an hour, to 90 minutes, and we meditate, we chant together, and then we just kind of discuss different contemplative practices, and just really pause and do nothing together for a few minutes, which seems to be hard to do these days.
It's true.
Where you get together downtown?
It's at well, we switch locations, but usually it's on Pierpont Ave, 345 Pierpont Ave. It's my friend Bo has a design studio called Enlisted Design, and just up above there we gather in the studio. So
Yeah, they had a shooting recently, or?
oh, I don't know, is there shooting down there?
Yeah, they're shooting. Somebody was killed, and Pierpont Avenue, but I'm familiar with the area.
I have no idea.
All right, let's do our Zoom people. Suzanne Stott, you mind sharing? Or are you too busy watching grandkids tonight?
No, I'm here. Hello.
Hi. Have you been able to hear what people have said, hopefully?
Yes, I have.
Great. What's on top of your mind tonight, Suzanne?
My confliction about the homeless. I spent a lot of my time today trying to help some homeless family members. That's always on my mind. And some refugees that didn't have food, they said. So it's been a great day. And I am Sally Reed's sister, by the way.
Oh, hello, Suzanne.
Hello.
I just saw Sally last week.
And Jay's friend. And Jay and Jane's friend, and maybe a couple of others there.
Thank you, Suzanne.
We're honored to be your friend, Suzanne. You do amazing things. You do amazing things. Suzanne, last year was honored by the LGBT community. She spoke at the Capitol on the opening of the Gay Pride Week. And she was one of those people, what do they call them? They sit in the car in the front of
Grand Marshal.
Thank you, Grand Marshal. She's also a Grand Marshal. She has advocated she was the first person to advocate and successfully get LGBT people to be able to adopt in the state of Utah. So she's remarkable in lots of ways.
Oh, no, I'm not, but I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Michael Austin, we're honored to have you too.
Remind him to unmute.
Oh, you got to unmute, my friend.
Hello, my name is Michael Austin. I am a hanger-on occasionally here. I, for the next 2 weeks, will be living in Evansville, Indiana, where I have lived for the last 7 years, and then I will be moving to San Pete County in 2 weeks. And that, if you've ever moved across the country, that's with 6,000 books, that's on the top of my mind.
Yeah. It's going to be on the top of your back pretty soon. Hey, tell us about the position you took.
So I will be the provost at Snow College, starting October 1st.
Congratulations. It'll be delightful to have you near. And then you, what's your official position at BCC Press?
I am the director of BCC Press. And stuff.
And stuff. And you put out a lot of good books.
We try really hard.
Yeah.
It's a completely volunteer organization. It's very much like a moderately dysfunctional LDS ward.
I love that description. Well, I'm delighted you're going to be nearer to us. You're a good soul.
So I am excited to move, and I have been trying to find a position back in Utah for some time, and it has worked out.
Nice. Michael writes beautiful stuff, and he's so thoughtful. So yeah, look him up. And who else do we have here? I don't see a name.
Karen Norris.
Oh, Karen Norris, your name isn't showing up for me. Sorry. How about sharing with us?
Hi, I'm Karen. Thanks for having me. I'm actually in Colorado. I don't know how I got on your mailing list, but I've enjoyed these chats. I'm a therapist, and I've been working on a self-compassion group, and that's been a big passion project of mine lately. Teaching self-compassion skills, mindfulness meditation, kind of as an alternative to self-esteem even, and as an antidote to shame.
And it's better than drugs, right?
Yes.
At least most drinks.
The side effects.
The side effects, yeah. Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
All right. I think we're ready to turn the time over to David. Again, if you haven't taken the time to read his bio, it's on the website. And then there was some really thought-provoking resources there that I posted that he gave us to look into. So if you haven't done that beforehand, it would be worth doing after. Sorry, I have a hard time knowing who to look at. So sometimes I get looking at the screen, forget you. So I apologize. Anyway, so David, here we go. Take it away.
Don't trip on that. That's a good thing. We'll see if I can do that. I'm passionate about not tripping on power cords. And I'm also passionate about watching the sunrise these days. We have a home in Midway and it's fun to see the sun touch the top of the tent on the backside and come down. And then fun last weekend to watch those storms come through. So maybe that's a dispassionate thing because it's so peaceful. Can you be passionate and very peaceful? I guess.
We can talk later.
Yeah. Maybe I need a therapist.
Well, we have one in Colorado.
Kristen can help me here. Jay asked me to talk a little bit about a book that I'm publishing that will come out in early December. And it's called A Better World, Overcoming Contention and Healing Our Divides. And when I wrote Bridges, which is a book about understanding why people step away from the LDS Church, I kind of came to understand that it's difficult for us as people. Doesn't matter whether it's religion or politics or I guess there's other things besides that. Maybe
What is it?
I don't know, fruitcakes or something. I'm not sure, dietary desires. But we have a hard time dealing with difference. And we have a hard time honoring and dignifying people who have different worldviews and different perspectives. And so for the last couple of years, I've kind of dug into that issue. And I've tried to understand it because it affects me. Maybe it affects you. I think it probably affects us all because it's part of our DNA. It's part of our brain structures. It's kind of part of who we are. And it's certainly part of society today. So, and that's troubling to me. I'm not very good sometimes at dealing with difference. Sometimes I create contention. Sometimes I have conversations and leave with negative feelings. Sometimes I feel like the only thing I can do is retreat from any meaningful conversation about something that might be considered controversial. And I don't like that. And so what I wanted to do was to kind of understand that in my own mind. And I felt like I could write a book largely to people of LDS background that would connect with us as people to help us understand maybe a different way of doing things. And maybe in some ways to heal ourselves personally, in addition to our communities. So I'm going to read some of parts of the book, talk about some of the research, and then we'll have a few group exercises, which I know you will love. I hope you will love. So President Nelson in April General Conference talked about peacemaking. And because I am passionate about peacemaking, just like Emily is, I listened extra hard and heard that. And here's some of his words. How we treat each other really matters. How we speak to and about others at home, at church, at work, and online really matters. Contention reinforces the false notion that confrontation is the way to resolve difference, but it never is. Contention is a choice, peacemaking is a choice. And I think for people who aspire to a better world, whether you're LDS or not, whether you look at President Nelson as the source of revelation or not, I think those words can connect with us. They did with me. What I want to do tonight is just talk a little bit about contention, talk about why we have it, kind of what about us as people kind of contributes to this, because, you know, it's wired into us. It is there, it's in our DNA. And maybe for real important reasons, but also having very dangerous side effects. And then I want to introduce a few ideas on what we can do about it. So we won't cover much of what I cover in the book, but we'll touch on things, and then we can talk and answer questions and discuss things. So first, there are some LDS teachings that I think are important to just highlight. And again, I think these are something that many of us, even if we're not LDS, would aspire to. We all deserve dignity. Elder Suarez said this: societies flourish when both law and culture recognize, respect, and protect the value of each person. The many religious and cultural differences across the globe only enhance that dignity. Our differences are often used as barriers to divide us, when they are actually an opportunity to enrich our lives. Dignity is a moral obligation we feel towards people. Everyone wants to be known, seen, and heard. So that touches me, that elevates us. It's kind of encompassed in scripture. We esteem not one flesh above another, or one man or woman shall not think of themselves above another. And Latter-day Saints kind of bind ourselves together. We, when we're baptized, we promise to comfort each other and to mourn with each other. And so there's this connection that we have to each other that is powerful and is a part of kind of the theology of the LDS world. Let me talk a little bit about what is contention. And this is what I wrote about it. So we'll just work off that definition for tonight. Might not be quite right in your mind, but contention is embodied about how we feel about the other person and their belief. I define contention as expressed or unexpressed negative interactions with another person and their belief, which creates distance or contempt. It may surface as anger and argument, but can also be silently unexpressed or cloaked in politeness. It's not necessarily found in what we say to others, but it's how we feel about it. Contempt is at the heart of contention, when we feel that we are better than the other person and that they have nothing worthwhile to offer us. We don't respect the other person as our neighbor, as a child of God, or as one who we can learn from. Instead of offering them dignity, something which everyone desires, we feel contempt. They become an enemy or a villain, an object of pity or disgust. Contention is a form of violence. It harms and damages ourselves and others. So that's what, when I talk about contention, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about conflict, because having differences of opinion isn't contention per se. It's about how we adjudicate those differences and how we interact with those differences. So, question. You can just raise your hand. Has you ever been in a situation with a friend or a family member where contention has harmed your relationships? Maybe some of you have. If so, I want to talk to you afterwards.
Maybe they can write a book.
Well, I needed some sort of DNA therapy, and you know, I know we're working on that in science, and maybe there's a gene therapy that can help me with that. And then this is more of an open-ended question is, how would you define that? And maybe I've already kind of talked about this, so I'll avoid that question. I'll go to the next one. What are dangers from avoiding conflict?
Ignorance, remain in ignorance.
Yeah, just elaborate on that. So how does conflict help us?
Conflict, well, conflicting opinions.
I'm sorry. Do you mind to speak in just a little bit?
I do not.
You don't mind or you won't?
Yeah, so
I do not mind.
Yes.
So conflict in the sense of being open about a disagreement and contending with it together. And one of the dangers of avoiding that is learning something new and learning something valuable and learning something that might change your perspective or your opinion. And if you don't engage in that, you remain in a little more ignorant than you would have if you did engage in that.
Thanks for sharing that. How many of you have avoided a conversation that's important because you were afraid that it would damage a relationship?
Yeah.
How does that feel?
Dishonest.
Yeah. Interesting. One more thought about the difference between conflict and contention. I see Emily's hand half up, and I remembered your name because you're passionate about peacemaking. Can't remember anyone else's name. What's your name over here? We're working.
I think for the majority of my life, I've conflated conflict with contention. And in the last 3 years, I can pinpoint moments where I have realized how unhealthy that is. And I've been working to unlearn some of the patterns that I have adopted over the course of my life to avoid conflict because I thought it was morally superior. Because I framed it as I'm avoiding contention.
Yeah.
And what I have discovered is it actually looks more like passive aggression.
That's the way it comes out for me, at least.
Which is really unhealthy and actually statistically higher along the Wasatch Front among Latter-day Saints. There's been a study done.
Might be in Minnesota too.
So I'm looking for more assertive and what I see are loving ways of engaging conflict because I feel like that's healthier in my interpersonal relationships for me and for the people I care about. And also working, I really appreciate Chad Ford's work that he's done. He talked about dangerous, radical peacemaking and dangerous love, I think is what his work was. But he essentially talks about seeing people as an I, not an it. And that has really helped me to transform the way that I engage in conflict and help others.
Okay. One more comment and then I'm going to move. Go ahead.
Is there a better word than conflict? Because to me, conflict connotes contention. Okay.
Yeah, and I use that word kind of intentionally there to kind of deal with the difference of feeling contempt in one case of contention, where the conflict of having opposing views compete with each other can be highly positive. So there could be a more neutral term there, and it might feel better to people. I think in scripture, we talk about how growth comes through opposition. And opposition of ideas goes to your issue of avoiding ignorance. When we have competing theories in science, for example, and they we experimentally figure out which one is right, we're enriched through that experience, and same in other issues. So let me just kind of tell you at least a few ideas that I have about why we have contention and why we have difference. We have different worldviews, and Allison Gray defined worldviews as a collection of attitudes, values, stories, and expectation about the world around us, which informs our every thought and action. Worldview is expressed in ethics, religion, philosophy, scientific beliefs, and so on. So each of us has this construct in our mind that interprets the world. And it interprets what fairness is, what goodness is, the aspirations that we have individually. And they're all formed differently. They come from our genetics. For example, this is surprising, but the research shows that our genetics are about 50% responsible for our political ideology.
Twin studies.
Yeah, separated twins, right? Jonathan Haidt does these studies, others have done it. They're done in Australia and the United States and in other places. There's something about our genetics that wire us to see the world in a particular way. For example, I think I kind of have more of the adventure gene than most people do. And I found Rochelle, and Rochelle found me, and
I'm an adventure.
we're an adventure. Well, we've lived in 4 countries together. We, move around, we have new experiences, we're comfortable with that. And that, I think there's genetic elements of that. I think we have to acknowledge that there is that. And Jonathan Haidt has a rubric to kind of frame that up that's useful. I think our culture that we live in matters. I grew up in kind of the angst of Vietnam and Watergate and trust of institutions. And that's different than if you were to grow up during the mortgage banking crisis or the Cold War, and your worldview is shaped by the concerns and the anxieties that you felt as a child. So there's intergenerational differences that come from those cultures. And, if you grew up at 9/11, you have an international perspective around terrorism and that is different than the one that I have. I think we also have kind of predispositions. LDS thought says we have a spirit that has trailing clouds of glory. For those of you that are of my generation, and sing along to that. Saturday's Warrior.
That's Carolyn Pearson. Was it Saturday's Warrior?
So, but in any case, we're shaped individually and uniquely. And what we see is a particular way of looking at the world is completely different than anyone else around us in the room, let alone the world. So that's one point. And because of that, we think what we see and perceive and value is right. But it's just the perspective of all of those forces inside ourselves. The second is our brains are funny things. They're really good at some things, but they do some things not particularly well. So for example, if I had a picture of a person and asked you to rate their attractiveness, you'd rate their attractiveness. If I put a political label underneath it, if you were of that political label, you would rate that person more attractive than if it was someone from a different political party. That's a clinical study that's been done. We actually see people differently. We're attracted to people based on their being in our group, whether it's political or other kinds of groups. If I read off to you a statement, if I put you in an fMRI machine, which is a machine that figures out what part of your brain's working at a particular time, and I read to you a political statement from someone that you supported, one side of your brain would light up. If I said that it was from another person of someone you didn't support, a different part of your brain would light up. So we're hardwired to deal with in-group and out-group. We call this in-group bias, and it's physiological. It's not something we can't overcome, but what it means is that we treat people in our own group more charitably than we treat people in what is not considered to be our group. And our group can be anything, it can be men or women, it can be gendered, it can be age, it can be politics, it can be religion, it can be, whatever is important enough to you that is defining as a part of your identity.
Okay. Can I say one thing? Benjamin Franklin did the same test with 2 of his friends, and one guy hated the other guy, okay, and he put his name on the other guy's essay, and the one guy loved it because it had. So it can not only be people, not only be groups, but it can be people. You can have a disposition towards towards individuals too. Okay, so it's not just a group thing; it's a bias thing, isn't it?
Our brains are biased. Our brains are wired to consider threats, and And so evolutionary biologists would basically say, when we lived in small groups of people, we were afraid of the neighboring village. And they'd come and raid us and take our crops, and there was real danger of outsiders, and the groups that survived that had inborn bias that favored their own group and was skeptical or fearful of another group. That still is in our brain. It's not like that went away when, it's still there. It's widely there. We also have other biases. There's lots and lots of them. Just another one I'll talk about is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it's really kind of a funny thing. We all think we're smarter than we really are. So it's called competency bias. And so let me just read some of the research on this.
I'm sorry, it's called what?
Dunning-Kruger or competency bias. 68% of professors, thought they were in the top 25% of all teachers. Is anyone a software developer? Okay, good. We can pick on them. 42% of software engineers thought they were in the top 5%. And, we know from Prairie Home Companion that all the kids in Lake Wobegon are above average. So, we tend to overrate our own understanding of issues. And the thing that's really kind of interesting about this is the more accomplished we are, the more we have that bias. So if you're considered elite, high IQ or highly educated or high position in your career, we suffer from this most. I put we in there, I'm sorry. You suffer from this. I'm a retired gray-haired guy, so, but I suffer from this too. And don't we hear it where, many regular people think they're experts on immigration, poverty, racism, election security, COVID. Heck, I've watched a couple of YouTubes, and so now I'm an expert. I've listened to a podcast, and the guy was a PhD. So now I'm an expert on, housing issues in San Francisco. We all do this. We're not slaves to these biases. We're not slaves to our brains on this, but they're there, and they often are the triggers that cause us for contention. You got a comment?
I thought there were people that have higher IQs. There's a lot of them that have that imposter syndrome, so they don't think that they're right. So there is a certain humility from knowing more, I guess.
So there's variation.
Yeah.
It's not universal, right? Everyone's different. So I think you're right.
I can say from experience that it's possible to both think you're smarter than you actually are and still have imposter.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate that comment. I've often hear this, people say, I didn't like that doctor, he just seemed so arrogant and just wouldn't listen to me. I wonder if that's also a case in many of the professions too. Assuming that you were somehow more knowledgeable than your patient. As I've gone through this study, I've come to reset my expectations about what I'm really capable of. The name of this chapter is A Spiritual Being on a Physical Chassis. We're just totally physical people. We see through a glass darkly. We do not see the world clearly. How could we? We have our own worldview that's informed by our set of experiences, which is completely different than anyone else's experiences. And yet we think that worldview is the right one. And we're pretty confident about it sometimes. So I think we also have to give ourselves grace and also really understand that we are prone to these issues. And that takes us to issues of humility and being willing to learn, being open. There's a third factor here. We live in a culture, and the United States is highly polarized. And if you look at data, there's something called affective polarization, which basically is how much do I like or dislike people on the other political side. We kind of have two sides in the United States. I realize there's some others too, but largely two sides. And the rate of affective polarization in the United States since 1980 has increased substantially year over year every time it's surveyed. In Canada, it's gone up, but not the same. In Germany, it's gone down. In the UK, it's gone down. In France, it's gone down. Japan's gone up a little bit, nothing like the United States. So we have a culture of polarization. You know, it's there, and it's there for specific reasons. And this next area, oh, by the way, I'll just toss this tidbit out. The amount of acceptance that we would have for political violence in the United States, because of this polarization that's surveyed, is equivalent to, guess where? Northern Ireland in the 70s. We just don't live across the street from the Protestants or the Catholics, you know, depending upon whether you're a Republican or, you know, a Democrat. But that level of animus is what is in our country right now. So not quite to Rwanda yet. Right. Yeah. And Rochelle and I served a mission in Sierra Leone. Yeah. And you know, not like they had. So there are institutional and cultural forces that exploit our worldviews and also the bias that we have in our brains. Every business kind of has a business plan that exploits our biases, right? And every advertisement that is run, every elevator pitch is to try and convince someone to do something. And so it's after us in a particular way. And it's not always malicious. Sometimes, you know, it's good stuff that, you know, helps make better lives. But sometimes it's stuff that doesn't make our lives better. And people spend billions of dollars to understand how to make us behave in a particular way. And there are institutions that have algorithms, models and messages to attract loyalty. They might be media organizations, they might be political candidates, they might be advocacy groups, and they fine-tune the messages so that you either turn on the TV, register to vote, donate, either to a political campaign or to a cause, and they know the messaging to do that. And there's some bad actors there that are malicious. And they employ fear, anxiety, and they do it on the left and the right. So if you're on the left and you're thinking I'm referring to this group, you're wrong, because this group is thinking you're referring to this group. Both sides do it because it works, because we're physical chassis, because it's predictable how we'll react. One researcher said the increasing levels of anger and fear in the electorate are, from the political system standpoint, a feature, not a bug. Pew finds that the angrier and more afraid you are, the likely you are to actually donate or volunteer. Another researcher said, contempt is a first step on the path to dehumanizing the other tribe. If the contemptible other is worthless, then I can safely disregard their hopes and fears. As the distance between us grows, I might become so indifferent as to ignore their suffering or even go to war against them. And those are the messages that are prevalent in our society. In a scary way, those are the messages that our children and grandchildren are forming their worldviews from. It was a different world when I grew up. We had animus, we had difficulty, but polarization is just a different animal now. So now I want to just kind of talk about some personal skills. What can we do about this? And there's a lot of them, and I'm just going to talk about 4 of them. So first is, when you enter into a conversation that is difficult, set your goal for the conversation. Decide what you want out of it. And there's a lot of different goals you can have. I'll tell you a couple that I think are really not very effective. I really need to tell someone what I think and set them straight. That goal usually doesn't work, but it's a goal that I see exercised a lot on social media. It's screaming into the void, you know, it's yelling. And, you know, for some people, that is their goal and they think that's effective. I don't think it's effective. Some people just want to fight, you know, and they want to, you know, create animus, and they want to trigger people, you know, they want to get people riled up. Sometimes people have these conversations to try and impress someone. You know, and to say, I'm really, really smart, and I'm the expert, and, you know, I understand, and I do that sometimes. I probably do all of these sometimes. And sometimes people try and manipulate, and I don't think manipulation is ethical. So here are some that I think are good ones. One is to try and connect and develop a relationship. And I think you can have a conversation with someone. I'll tell you, I had a conversation. If someone believes this, I'm not trying to diminish this worldview. I did an hour-and-a-half conversation with a woman who believes that Bill Gates is trying to sterilize the American population with COVID vaccinations. And I don't believe that. I think that's not within the realm of kind of plausible, polite conversation. But I was able to listen to her and understand kind of aspects of her life. And I didn't try and change her. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to develop a relationship and connection with her. And I was able to do that, even though, you know, I had to sit on my hands at times. It seemed kind of crazy to me. Second is we can try and learn from someone. We can sit down with someone and, you know, if they have a different view as we do on education or immigration or poverty, we can ask them and recognize the dignity in that other person, that they have a legitimate worldview that I can learn from. And that is not conflict, right? But that is an opportunity to learn. That is an opportunity to hear other people's opinions that are always going to be different than yours. Because none of our opinions are the same anywhere, because we all have different worldviews. None of our worldviews are the same. So we can sit down with people and learn from them. And our purpose can be basically, teach me why you think this. Help me understand. And that can be an objective. We can try and change someone's belief. And I think on some issues in society, that's important. I think we're faced with really challenging issues at times in society. And I think we need to learn better how to have conversations where we have a different opinion and we're trying to change someone else's opinion. We can't do that without being open that we're wrong, and we have to do it in a specific way. It's hard. It usually doesn't work, and the skills are usually ones that require practice and deftness. And I'm perhaps not as good at it as you are. I'm just not very good at it per se. And then the last is we can come to an agreement. We can, even in difference, come to an agreement that is productive. We do this all the time in professional settings where we have to compromise. We often do it in our families. We probably do it, probably the world is better at it in professional settings than in families. But it can, you know, it ought to be done in both places, and it ought to be done in the world as a whole. And it ought to be the way that we manage societies better. So that's first skill, set a goal. We all can do that. It doesn't require a PhD to learn this. Just when you get into a conversation, what do I want to accomplish? Second is learn to listen. That seems so easy. That's hard. You know, it's, you know, basically the way I think about it is if I'm not thinking about listening 75% of the time versus talking 25% of the time, then I'm not listening. And what it means to listen is to not formulate a response. It means to not try and rebut. It means to set aside your emotions and any threats that you feel. And it means to do what Elder Suarez says, is to honor the dignity of that other person, and that they're coming from a legitimate place and that they deserve to be heard. Be curious. You know, want to know. Reflect that, you know, we don't know as much as we think we know, and that we can be open about that. I like this. This is a tweet from Morgan Housel, and I've looked up who he is, but I didn't know when I saw this tweet, but I really liked it. your personal experiences make up maybe 0.00000001% of what's happened in the world. But maybe 80% of how you think the world works. I mean, that's just beautiful, isn't it? And we all think we know how the world works, and we just have no clue. You know, that's the reality. Be curious, try and figure out how it works. You know, figure out what you don't know. Ask questions of your own mind. What about this topic don't I know? What about this person can teach me something that I don't know? And when you're in that world, you never feel contempt for that other person. You know, even that person that had somewhat of a, well, I thought, an outlandish view about COVID and vaccinations. At the end, you know, I tend to cry a lot, but she shared some personal stories in there that brought me to tears. So I can completely disagree with what she said, but I can really relate to her humanness. So this is what I wrote. We know little about others' lives and the challenges they face. We overestimate our knowledge about the world. It's hard to set aside our competency bias and be humble and face up to how little we know about other people's situations. Now, I'm going to break you up into pairs, and I'm going to have you figure out this last one on your own. This last one is called the ideological Turing test. So this one's a little bit more advanced than these others. These others are simple. So does anyone know the Turing test? Alan Turing?
Yes.
Alan Turing Jones. Is that your middle name?
Close.
So-
Well, it's the test to understand whether it is an artificial intelligence talking with you.
Yeah, so he was basically saying computers are intelligent where you put them behind a curtain, and if they interact with you and you can't tell whether they're a computer or a human, then it's intelligence, and that's the Turing test. So the ideological Turing test is where you try and state an opposing point of view to the degree that someone who holds that view could not tell that you don't believe that. Does that make sense?
It's kind of like a steel man argument, right?
Yeah.
Instead of a straw man.
Yeah. So, you know, for example, if here's a couple of them that that you could do is building a wall on the border. Is that you know, advocate for building a wall on the border if that isn't what you think ought to be done to solve any sort of immigration problems. And if you could articulate that as well as someone who really believed that, then you pass the ideological Turing test. And another example is, you know, double the amount of legal immigration. And if you thought that that was best for US policy to double the amount of legal immigration, and you could argue that even though you didn't believe that, then you can pass the test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of group you 4, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4. And I'm going to have you take 5 minutes and see whether there's a topic that you could agree to talk about, and one of you could try and pass off the ideological Turing test. So here's a couple of other ones. These are more controversial. Those are, I don't consider those highly controversial. I think there's legitimate positions with each. So another one would be Biden stole the election. Another one would be defund the police. Another one would be the earth is flat. Another one is you aren't real and I'm just living in a simulation. So, you know, pick your own, but that just kind of shows you the kinds of issues you could talk about and see if you could articulate. I can do 4 of those. I can't really do the last 2. Just in cards up. I can't really say that the earth is flat.
So you don't have any religious ones in there?
Pick a religious one if you want in your group. Some people they're religious.
This is the only true church.
So you can talk about that with the 4 of you and put that up and be able to argue that. So take 5 minutes and see if you can, see if one of you can pick a topic that you don't agree with and be able to articulate it as though you agree with it. You kind of understand?
Yeah, so our friends on Zoom, maybe you can grab a family member or something. We're not equipped right now to put you in separate chat rooms. We'll try to get that next time. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to send you this.
I'm good. That's fine. We can give this.
We were talking about how to get rid of people, so I think here's some of these.
Well, we can come up with our own example, just so what is something that we all would agree about, but that we could argue.
Well, this kind of shit.
Want to know.
I don't know how.
Kids are in.
Sounds like debate, right?
Well, you can be.
And you're giving up.
So you know each other,
So I
right?
probably.
So you know any issues that this is really.
Like there's really, that there's that as far as,
Okay, so see, you have a rainbow, so you might.
we all follow hard.
Okay, so see if you would.
Space that they chose to be held rather than space.
Okay, so pick a different one, because just arguing now, I see what you're saying.
Argument that has been.
I used to live in
on for work.
I used to and it was logical. And so the logicalness is like.
Yeah. So I can only relate to very few things.
You are.
But there might, so what other topics?
Populate the world, populate the world. It could only be done. They confirm. Creates life.
And then we're trying to build.
So together we build an argument.
We probably don't.
So I think you would pass the ideological principles, and I think for subjects where.
Oh, they're actually.
No, I haven't argued, I just read it's pretty specific. I think it's harder when we're, we've had that opinion all.
It's like the world is flat.
Yeah.
So at the minimum, how have you?
As far as you can see.
You can't go with that.
I'm trying to do the structure, I'm trying to do a steel man.
Not following up, we're not following up.
So this is the issue.
Yeah, and you wouldn't pass the ideological principles. I can't either.
You can just keep going. Whack.
Yeah, so the reason the Texas power bond really comes back together all is because one of the most force of us to have to consider the other person to be able to understand what about the world. I think there's some substantial differences of belief. I could argue both sides.
They don't seem as complex personalities as women.
I think the case is well, for example, so for issues that would not having this my daughter was an immigration attorney. So my first example was immigration. And I thought about that in the last year.
They seem to be
Ever have. So right. But I don't think, so just parts of, I am not in favor of building a border wall. That's not. I can't Cannot understand what about.
We have
If I want to have a conversation, I haven't had that conversation.
And young winners.
I need to get to the depth where I really understood what was motivating. So go through the change of the. Government level work, law, taking away my job, and until we'll never pass the test. So this test is powerful because it puts kind of the goal of the conversation. It's to understand you well enough. So on the issues that we differ, I really understand where you're coming from. Means I'm gonna have to ask questions. Means you're gonna have to. But it's gonna be. So that's why the tool can be really.
I've read. Like the first thing I read was probably in American Mind. It didn't really mean I finished it, but I'm like, I can see it, yeah, but I'm like.
Regular sun.
You know, it's very much our, really, you know, our parents.
Yeah.
That's the world.
And then, you know, there's a different, I was just talking to Michelle about this. She has a couple of friends.
We've been
And
raised by our children. And their experience. Our parents
but
Okay, everyone, I need to draw this back together.
all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's fascinating, but this is religious movement where she feels the guy, his family, she should get to that. So kind of interesting, because that's the reason. No, no, she's definitely.
Okay, everyone, I'm gonna draw you back together, and I want to go to a conclusion. I want to talk about this exercise here, and then I want to go to a conclusion, and then we'll have questions or discussions or whatever you guys want to do. So this test, the reason I think it's really powerful, and you may have encountered this in your discussion, it takes real time to understand people who have different worldviews that led them to legitimate beliefs that are different than yours. And the way you do that is you ask questions, you become intensely curious, you repeat back to see whether you've got it right, and you genuinely want to know. And if you have that, then and the reason the ideological Turing test is important is it puts that rhetorical framework, analytic framework in your mind as you're having that conversation. We had a brief discussion over here, and this man here, we were talking about an issue where he has changed his opinion, and it's easy for him to frame up his old opinion. But that was an issue where there was a lot of thought and maybe angst, and took him a while to kind of work through to get to a change. And so even for him, it took time. And many of our beliefs are really not that deeply examined. Our beliefs, and maybe immigration for you, maybe you haven't thought deeply about building a wall or letting people in, or maybe until George Floyd was murdered on, a sidewalk with video showing that to us. Maybe you never heard the words defund the police. So until you get exposed to it and until you dig into it, our beliefs tend to be very cursory. And they tend to be framed up in almost kind of an emotional or subconscious cognition, as opposed to a more experimental with test tubes and Bunsen burners kind of examination. We form the views maybe in kind of lazy ways, because they just kind of happen to us because of our worldviews, for our cultures. So this is going to take you all out of that, and it's going to make it your conversations completely different. Pam had a comment.
I thought that was an interesting experiment because we were arguing and I was arguing the opposite of what I actually think. I've had a very interesting physical sensation as well. And
Did it start down here in the gut, or?
kind of angry and feeling misunderstood, and maybe, and it was interesting.
Alan?
I was thinking about your 4 tools. I think there are 4, right?
Yeah.
I think the most dangerous one is the goal. I think it's really critical that we think about goals in the same way we think about open-ended questions. You know, and that the goal is not to accomplish a certain thing. The goal has to be more expansive in maybe improving our relationship or understanding someone better, or being able to clear the air, or whatever that you might think. But a goal of, I want them to understand me, or I want them to agree with me, or a goal that has expectations that are going to likely cause more conflict than less. I think that's a really critical part of that first step.
There are non-contentious tools to help people change. And I think we need to learn those tools. They're harder than the ones I've given you. You know, you'll have to decide whether you want to do that. I find for most people about 95% of their contentious conversations happen in the goals, where we should have goals of wanting to understand people, wanting to build relationships, wanting to come to consensus. I think those are important. I want to do a conclusion here, and then we'll have more conversation and discussion. Well, one point I want to make that before I get to the conclusion, and this is a warning. Civility sometimes is dangerous and wrong.
That was a good podcast you put on there as a resource.
Was that Alex Samelin?
Yeah.
So
He brought up that point.
He wrote a book called Against Civility. And in his book, he talks about the Senate in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, where slavery is, you know, a real problem in the Union, and the Senate has to be civil, which means they can never talk about it. So Zamelin argues that civility and contention is not the opposite of civility. So don't put him in that camp. But sometimes in the name of getting along, we tolerate things that are so wrong. We don't solve them. So, sorry. The model that I think is effective on this is the model of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, because they created conflict, right? You know, the march in Selma, passive non-activity in India, you know, those were acts of conflict. But they were not acts of contention. So there are these issues, and they're going to differ for each of us, where we have to act because we have to create a better world. And without us acting, we won't get that better world. The best way to do that is with very thoughtful and practiced skills to be able to accomplish that. And it's maybe not something all of us are going to do, maybe it's just some people. In my book, I tell a story about Melanie Tagg, who was a past Relief Society president in Loudoun County, Virginia. Has anyone heard of Loudoun County, Virginia?
No.
Why have you heard about it?
The name sounds familiar.
So this They're is racist. ground zero for CRT and bathroom conflicts. In 2019. And she just said, we have to stop this. So she convened different groups of people. And they made both parents who were concerned about LGBTQ and discussion of racism in school curriculum, and also advocates on the left that would be concerned about raising concerns about racism and wanting gender and sexual inclusion. And she brought groups together, and using good skills, those groups made recommendations to the school boards that they all could agree upon. So there are ways to do these, but it requires a set of skills. And I don't know if I'm the kind of person who could do what Melanie did, but if you are that kind of person, we need you. So let me conclude by just talking about the collective healing that we need to do. And I'm just going to read this because I want to get it right. This is what I wrote in the book. Communal harmony requires us to sacrifice individually for the collective good. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs calls this morality, which he defines as a concern for the welfare of others, an active commitment to justice and compassion, a willingness to ask not just what is good for me, but what is good for all of us. It is about us, not me, about we, not I. And then unquote. And then I go on. In such a society, we think about the collective good and subordinate personal interests because it is what society needs. While we don't hold our goods and possessions in common, we hold other people's needs and their interests in our heart. God has always guided his people towards the concept of we and us. Examples include the city of Enoch, the people of Alma, the primitive church after Jesus' resurrection, 4th Nephi, in the early days of the Restoration. Discipleship has always included concerns for others and taking care of their needs. Today, Latter-day Saints don't practice the law of consecration in the same way that early Latter-day Saints held their goods in common. But as part of temple covenants echoed in the handbook, we promise to keep the law of consecration, quote, this is quoting from the handbook, to keep the law of consecration, which means members dedicate their time, talents, and everything with which the Lord has blessed them to building up Jesus Christ Church on earth, unquote. We give our whole heart and souls for Zion. Some have achieved this fully dedicated discipleship, but most of us are still a work in progress, with our hearts and minds aspiring to that commitment. That level of communal devotion isn't limited to those who have made similar commitments. Jesus didn't say we need to love those neighbors that belong to our church or think like us. We are the Samaritans, and our neighbors are everyone. Our discipleship includes understanding and ministering to others according to their needs and wants. Our work isn't limited to lifting individuals, but lifting communities in similar ways. Our goal is creating a society that reflects God's goodness and meets others' needs, even when their religious beliefs and values are different than ours. Our doctrine teaches the value of working with others in our communities. We learn from others' different experiences and beliefs and find ways to peacefully live together. And I'm quoting Church now, which says, we find meaning in human connection when we climb out of ourselves and discover the dignity of others, even if we disagree. And no one should have to give up their identities, since no particular group has a monopoly on all that is wise, beautiful, and just. This is the Church speaking, just for everyone, in case you missed that. Our experiences have gaps that need to be bridged, and our perspectives have blind spots that need to be filled. This engagement between difference is called pluralism, a society organized under common laws and civilizations
but with no single belief system that wields total influence. Not just one or even two, but many perspectives and traditions can coexist within a shared moral framework. Unquote.
Where did you quote that?
Yeah,
from?
what is that quoted from?
What's the source?
I don't have my footnotes.
Divided book.
So the context of this, it's interesting. I will speak off script here, and I will give you my own observation about where the church is on this issue. They are of mixed minds at times. And this, I think, came as a church newsroom release in 2014, as Utah was trying to implement protections against housing discrimination and employment discrimination based on sexuality and gender orientation, while at the same time protecting religious liberties. It's commonly called the Utah Compromise. And when the church did this, they practiced the ideological Turing test. That's what they did. They sat down with groups of people and they prepared church members that might think this is stupid to protect gay people from employment discrimination.
It was impressive, yeah.
And so they published these kinds of statements to do that. Now, I'd love to have this read in General Conference. And President Oaks talks eloquently this way. That quote by Rabbi Sachs, I found that because Dallin Oaks quotes it. And his speech in front of University of Virginia is masterful on this. Now, you know, you may not agree with everything Dallin Oaks says, or maybe not anything that he agrees with, but I think you'd find wisdom in that talk. Because he talks about these kinds of principles. So I think we're kind of halfway there as a church, understanding that at times we actually create polarization by saying such strongly worded beliefs of things like, you know, there's a right way and a wrong way to live life, but people's worldviews aren't formed that way. And so I think we have to sometimes moderate that kind of language, because that exclusive language that we sometimes talk about filters into our worldviews. Because if you have an LDS culture, you're going to absorb that, and it's going to be formed in the way in which you see the world. Questions, discussion. I heard a timer go off. What time? You want to close and we can talk? Or?
No, we'll keep going. So I found in my personal life, to moderate that kind of speech, I need to actually moderate and change my thinking. Otherwise, I'm kind of just being a PR person, right? I'm just putting out there what I want people to hear. And so a statement like that the church made, is rooted in, I believe, in our doctrine, but often not in our practice. And until we do the work individually, doing what, you know, what kind of you and Ross talked about in terms of going into spaces that make us uncomfortable and are different than our beliefs, and finding people we love there, then we're just going to be kind of parsing words, as opposed to actually believing a statement like that and believing that you know, this Catholic or this atheist or this Hindu or this Buddhist are genuinely just as worthy of God's love and have just as much to offer me as I think I have to offer them. And unless we actually come from that standpoint, as opposed to the tradition I grew up in, you know, we have the truth and we are the only true church, which fortunately we don't say that much anymore. It seems like as much. And that framework that we came from, then it's going to be hard to cross those divides.
I think we have to heal ourselves before we can do this kind of work.
Yeah.
I think work's kind of a funny word here, but
no,
you know, I think one of the things that the book helped me is, I think I'm a different person having kind of considered these issues. I hope I am. I aspire to be a better person, but I think I've changed to some extent. So I think the work does have to happen inside ourselves. Question here, and then we'll go here, and then we'll go there.
I just, thinking get to know the person. Their ideas are not necessarily dangerous in and of themselves. But if the question is, can some ideas be considered dangerous enough that there has to be some kind of suppression at work?
Yeah, a book that you might want to read to kind of consider that. I'm not to a point where I know the answer on that, but I have thought about that. It's a book by Patrick Mason and David Pulsifer called Proclaim Peace. And I've not talked to David Pulsifer about it. I've heard Mason talk about it. And he basically says that violence, and if you are going to violence, there's all different shades of it, of enforcing things, isn't part of our theology, in any sort of way. And I've pondered what is violence. I've thought a lot about this book. I read it, it came out November 2 years ago, read it 3 times, still trying to figure out where I kind of fit on this. And I realized that violence isn't just guns. It's policy. It's how we choose to tolerate certain issues, how we treat marginalized people, how we de-dignify them in society. And there may be some issues. Alex Zamelin would argue, for example, that chattel slavery persisted for years and years and years because we chose to be civil and not to be violent about it. And in fact, it only ended with violence. So I don't know the answer, but I want to ponder that one more. And maybe I need to go to your meditation, and that would be what I would figure out. I ponder when I run. But,
the silly thing is, I did the math on the Civil War, and the amount of money that was spent destroying our nation would have paid to buy all the slaves at market value and give them their freedom. And so the violence very rarely is the right choice.
And you didn't count up 250,000.
Didn't count any of that. I'm just talking about the actual dollars spent and what had to be done afterwards. We could have paid for that slaves at full value.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we could pay for that we fix.
Did you see anything on how many slave owners would have accepted that?
Well, that's a real big political problem you'd have to get through.
Okay.
But we killed 500,000 people doing it the other way. So I think it would have been worth the effort.
And compare that with, say, Brazil or the UK, who eventually abolished it.
Did you have a comment?
I kind of promised I'd go to here.
So I have a question about humility and falling short. I like the reference to Governor Cox's the article on that, and where at the end of that article it talks about where he calls Congress imbeciles, and then he apologizes. I think he did that on Twitter, and he says his wife's really good about calling him out, and so he apologized. So, but I thought that was a really good thing to see someone want this, not be great at it, and call people imbeciles, and then apologize for it. And so I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So you raised something that I think is a really important issue. Name calling is highly polarizing. I can't believe how many people have told me how offended they were when Hillary Clinton referred to the central part of the United States as flyover country or the deplorables. And I don't know how many people are automatically alienated from a message that Hillary Clinton offered about social justice simply because she called him a name. So think about the names that we use. We call people who leave the church apostates, or wayward, or true blue Mormons, or indoctrinated cult followers, or we refer to some Republicans as being fascists, or Democrats as being Marxists. And so we use these labels that are intended to accelerate this outgrouping. And they're natural for us to do. It's the wiring in our brains. And so Cox does it. Cox has an initiative called Disagree Better. I don't know if you've seen that. I'm on Twitter. It's amazing how many liberal people just hate him because he passes conservative stuff and he says, look, we should disagree better. Like, he's a conservative. Give me a break. He's going to be a conservative. That doesn't mean disagree better. Doesn't mean he's going to be a liberal. Give me a break. So, but I've seen him say things like imbecile and change his opinion. And he's not a politician. If we had more politicians like him, we'd have more legitimate dialogue about the issues that are legitimate. And he's not my political persuasion, but if I was in a room with him and we had a dialogue, I think we both would, if we did it the right way, we both would learn. Maybe I would learn and he wouldn't, I don't know, but he has things to offer me. So I think that's an important initiative that he's talking about. And the more politicians that do that are the better. I don't know where to go. I want to see women's hands. So
Okay, I'll be fast. This is my last comment, I promise. So for me, like, ultimately, people have their free agency to believe what they want, and we know they're wired certain ways and stuff. But the most damaging part of all this is within the family. And so I've had to come to a place of, in myself of like, don't argue with them. The family is more important than being right. And I've told them all that as well. We are a family and we're not gonna, if we're gonna fight all the time about this, then we're not gonna talk about it anymore. I don't know if that's a good solution, but so far it's kind of kept the peace. And sometimes can open a dialogue in a less heated environment.
So there's an author named Monica Guzman, and she has a tool. She has a little dial that measures the effectiveness of conversations. And one of those dials is containment. And group conversations on contentious issues are always more difficult than they are one-on-one.
Yeah.
So you may find that having a conversation with one of your family members who disagrees in a group would be harder than if you just had it with them one-on-one. And I've done that. I have an anarchist for a son. And
two plus their wives.
And at first it was, you're crazy. And then it was, I don't get it. Tell me what it is you believe. And when I got past you're crazy, tell me what you believe. It was wonderful to hear from him. I mean,
I have a husband that's an anarchist now.
I need to talk to him and find out why. So I think your observation is correct, Pam. And one of the tools is to understand how you create settings so that you can have that. And containment is an important element. That's why the internet is so hard to have meaningful conversations, because you might have 600 people join your conversation, and then you have no containment and you can't say, hey, this gets heated, can I leave? And you don't have any of the opportunities to break.
And you can't like always go, well, I'll talk to you one-on-one, but my goal is to make you think like me. You can't do that either, because that defeats the entire program.
Yeah. So there's a book, and I think it's in the show notes. Do we call these show notes?
Oh, show notes.
I want to call them show notes. That sounds really cool.
It does. I like that.
I think there's a resource in there, and this guy's got a copy of the book. David McRaney's How Minds Change. And telling people to change their opinion is the worst possible way to try and have someone change their opinion. So there's other ways in which you can have a conversation and have them become as open as you are about learning and looking at their position. And it doesn't start off by let me show you why you're wrong. Let me show you the facts. Well, if you just read this article, you'd figure it out. That just doesn't work. But McCraney has good dialogue there.
Wait, when Monica Guzman's book is entitled If Memory Serves, I never thought of it that way. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yeah, she's a liberal columnist, Hispanic, Latin origin, and her parents live in Seattle, where she lives, and they're Trumpers. So that's how the book starts. Just how do they have Thanksgiving dinner? And she has some really good tools in there, and I use some of her work in the book.
She has a great TED Talk as well. I was just gonna offer the footnote for the quote that you read. It was from The Architecture of a Pluralistic Society by Elder Suarez. And the speech was actually delivered on March 23rd, 2022.
Oh, that's at the Dallas.
At a religious freedom symposium in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Oh, okay.
So the reference that you shared was at the bottom of that. And then I was gonna add that I think healing ourselves is important and also impossible. I have found that the healing comes from the Prince of Peace.
Nice, thank you. And
I'm sorry, do you mind just repeating that?
The source, yeah. The Architecture of a Pluralistic Society, it's on the Church Newsroom. And it was March 23rd, 2022, and it was delivered by Elder Suarez.
The church is the signature to a declaration called the Punta de Este Declaration on Human Dignity, that also some of this material can come from. The church, in their religious freedoms efforts, which some people could be cynical about, which I am not anymore, is legitimately offering dignity to people, regardless of who they are and where they come from. So there's a big commitment for the church on that. So thank you for the source on that.
So one of my favorite quotes from Fiddler on the Roof is, he's talking to these guys in the street and says, "You're right." And the other guy says, "You're right." And the other guy says, "How can they both be right?" And he goes, "You're right." And the truth of it is, if you take a right and a wrong, you can't compromise them and get a right, And there are some things that are really right, okay, and that's some things that are really wrong. My question to you is this: when do you just sit on your hands and just be quiet, and when do you say, "You know what, I just can't agree with that," okay, in a conversation?
I think there's ways.
Where do you draw the line?
Well, I think in healthy society, we have to be able to raise our hands and say, "I disagree." But we don't do that by going into school board meetings and disrupting it. We don't do it by refusing people who we see as being too conservative to come to liberal educational institutions and speak. Condoleezza Rice just was not able to speak at Stanford, was it? Yeah. Where was that? So, we have to be able to have more room for that, although we will be imperfect. There is a framework developed by the Templeton Institute. It's called covenantal pluralism. And covenant to an LDS audience means one thing. The reason the Templeton Institute uses this is it implies something more than a contractual obligation of all participants. It's a higher level spiritual commitment to each other, to understand each other and defend each other's needs. As you don't retreat ever from your values in this rubric for making communal decisions, but you're always understanding other people's needs and finding common ground.
But see, sometimes I say, "Well, that doesn't really matter. That doesn't really matter." Well, that matters. I got it.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line?
I draw it on basic human dignity issues. I draw it on fairness. I draw it on marginalization. You know, some of you now will look at my face and see that I'm less handsome because I won't agree with your political orientation. Some may think I'm more handsome, but I think the issues of social justice are those kinds of issues. I think the issues of poverty, discrimination, of equal opportunity are defining values that I'm going to raise my hand on. And I know other people have genetics or cultural predispositions that cause them to raise their hands on issues that are so important to them that they need to not sit on their hands and raise them. And I need to be wise enough to listen to them when they do that, because I have those blind spots. Really related to that, I wonder if you could, and this is a big question, so maybe you had some great book suggestions, so maybe you missed a book suggestion, but for me, this becomes very real when I encounter an institution. It's one thing to sit down with a friend and sit on my hands. It's another thing to encounter an institution where I may not actually even have very much power. And so there's not only the question of, can I sit on my hands for this? This is important enough to me. But also, like, is raising my hand even going to do anything? Or is it just going to ostracize me from the community? So I wonder if you could speak to how do we approach this in bigger systems in ways that are productive and consistent with the healing that we've been talking about too, because I find that's a space where I just get mad. Yeah, so I have been working with an organization called Braver Angels. I don't know if some of you know it.
We'll be having them coming up soon.
Yeah.
Erica Munson is our state rep.
She's the blue state rep.
Yeah.
What's the name of the red state rep? I've met her. But in any case, they're a group that deals with depolarization. Jonathan Haidt's on their board. David Blankenhorn, if you know that name, is their CEO. Cox spoke at their annual summit. Blankenhorn has concerns about 3 institutions that are polarized. And they're working on ways in which we could measure the polarization within inside those institutions and strategies to deal with them. And one is education, one is media, and the other is politics. Those 3 areas, how would you kind of measure that? And how do you kind of encounter that in a way? Braver Angels has a program that's been adopted by a number of universities where their freshmen are oriented using Braver Angels techniques, some of which I've already told you tonight, to help them deal with the differences that they're going to encounter in higher education. We're talking universities here. I don't know how to specifically give you advice on how you would do that. I interviewed a person, she was actually a beta reviewer of my book. I had 30 beta reviewers because I have one worldview. I needed at least 30 more. So, you know, most of them were white, gray-haired, retired men. You know, there were other people. And this woman said, I don't want to know what other people think, because if I find out what they think, I might not like them. So, and if I speak up, I am aware that there is a cost and I'm not prepared to pay it. So in that dial of conversation, I think one dial has to be, am I prepared to pay for the cost of having that discussion? And the paying may be, it hurts me as a person and I lose a friend because I can no longer respect them. Or it may be because I lose status in my social community because of what I say and what people think I believe. So, you know, I think you have to weigh those kinds of issues quite practically based on your own circumstances and reflect that what you're trying to do is something good. But there's going to be limits to what you can get done. And you have to be reflective and honest about those. Otherwise, you'll run into the machine. There's plenty of machines. Okay.
Just a thought. Taylor, my experience over the last 10 years working with the church as an institution, not directly with any authorities, but trying to be my own change agent. I just come to see, it's easy to see any corporation as its own entity or intelligence, but really it's just a group of people. And those group of people can be effective, particularly over time. And the changes which some people in the LDS faith don't see as positive, and some do. But the church has shifted quite a bit in some ways, and that's not because the 15 sat in a room and just prayed and had some kind of revelation come in. It came because lots of people, some with more influence than others, but over a worldwide church, affected them. And it's always been that way, you know, from early church history to now. And I think in any corporation, I mean, you can read about Steve Jobs and his, you know, any corporation is a group of people. And yes, there may be a group of very powerful people, but they're still influenced. And they also want to survive, you know, and I believe in at least the one that I know the best, the LDS institution, most of them are sincere people that want it to survive for good reasons. They may be wrong in their thinking, and they may not always make the best decisions, like I don't always, and I'm wrong in my thinking, but it has changed and it can change. And I've seen it over my lifetime, it changed a lot. You know, I'm 63 now, and so from where I was as a young boy to where it is now, there's some big shifts, which gives me great hope that there can still be big shifts. And then I always try to hold in my mind that there's people just as strongly opinionated about what they think needs to change, which is the opposite of me. You know, that's where the magic is, right? I mean, there's people that feel like having LGBTQ people be more accepted is the wrong direction. And I've got to hold that, you know, and as someone who believes in a loving God, I see God doing that constantly, holding all of this. And Hamish could probably say it much more eloquently than I can.
Need to go to a lot, because I feel like that's what it's hard though. And it's hard to hold it when I've got to go sit in church every single day. And I'm not quite holding it yet, but it's being dumped on me anyway. And that's, but I recognize more and more. I recognize more and more that it is not. I want to learn to hold it.
We'll get better at it over time.
Yeah, it's not always, it's the process, right?
I mean, you know, we live in the United States. We've been taught to be polarized. Germans have been taught not to be polarized. And so it's something that we can learn individually, and it's something we can learn as a society. So, you know, I think we ought to have hope that over time, this gets better. It may be worse for a while, maybe worse for a generation, I don't know. But I think over time it gets better. And we as a species are highly adaptable. And we're genetically wired to be groups. And so, you know, I think there's hopes that our groups will behave, you know, in a better way. Do you want to keep going, or?
Are we pretty good with questions? We probably ought to stop, so Ed and Kristen can go to bed at some point. It's been a lovely conversation. Thank you. This is the second time that it's coming. You came and talked about your first book, and it was very wonderful. So you did mention Patrick Mason and Pulsifer, and so during COVID, I did them during the Zoom conversation. So you can go on the website and hear them talk about that book, Peace, which is really, really good. And then also on my website is a guy named Daryl Davis. Some of you might be familiar with him. He did a TED Talk, Black jazz musician, who has brought down top leaders in the KKK by developing a relationship with them. And then they finally just Because he's such a good guy, nice guy, he just gave up. He gave him his rope, their ropes. I mean, these were high up KK guys. Interestingly, he's going to be at the Faith Matters Restore conference, speaking in person in a few weeks. Well, about a month in October. So anyway, there's some great resources out of it. It's hard, right? But I don't think it was meant to be easy. I mean, we all in our minds think life should be easy, and it just never is. And that's what produces amazing stories and amazing human beings. And so I think the sooner we just learn to live with that, the Buddhist idea of life is suffering, right? That we make peace with that it's supposed to be hard, and that we're going to get lots of crazy ideas given to us and stuff stuck in our genes and DNA that we didn't want, and we just gotta learn to deal with it.
We just gotta learn to be long-suffering.
Joyfully long-suffering. I mean, trying to find joy. And one of the things I've loved about doing these groups over the years is I genuinely want to understand and learn. And because I don't have a college degree, I mean, this is my education. This is how I learn. And I've been very humbled by so many beautiful people like Dave and people that come to this group and people that lead the group. I just feel so fortunate. And I so feel so fortunate people like you come and participate. Because without you, I didn't have, I would be siloed and I wouldn't have these other thoughts. And I think that's, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to hosts like Ed and Kristen open their home, because their home isn't given. Grateful to Jane to continue to support, even though her journey took her a different direction. But I appreciate that very much. So thank you for being here. This wasn't really meant to be a religious thing. Hey Mitch, do you have not a prayer, there might be a prayer, but just some kind of something to send us out with?
Secular Buddhist way of closing.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could just maybe take a moment together and just drop into stillness and silence, and just, if you feel like it's a time to pray for yourself, then feel free to do that. But if maybe it's just a time to check in with what's been shared here and just feel how your heart might be receiving it. I'll give you a little bit of guidance so it doesn't feel like but I'll try and keep it short too. So
thank you.
Just find yourself in posture.
I didn't ask him to do this beforehand, so thank you for just being spontaneous.
I'll try to be quick. Find yourself in a posture that's both comfortable and relaxing, but also alert and attentive. You can close the eyes if that feels comfortable. If it feels better to keep them open, you can take a downward, non-specific gaze. Bring your attention to your breathing. Just let any worries or contentions just fall away. Just find yourself in your body in this present moment, breathing. Notice the push and pull of countless polarities within the body. Democrat, Republican, religious, non-religious, male, female, old, young. Just allow all these polarities to be unified within you in this moment. Recognizing that every perspective has virtue and value. when you're ready, you can open your eyes, come back to the room, back to the group. Thank you. I bow to you. Oh,
And thank you to the crickets. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you for adventuring with me.
I'm gonna meet this other country now, so.
Goodbye.